Welcome to the Journey to Iconic, the podcast about emotional self-leadership. This is where we explore the inner mechanics behind confidence, presence, emotional regulation, and self-trust. The skills that determine how you lead, communicate, and respond when life gets real. I'm Kirsten Barfoot, and this season isn't about self-help. It's about learning how to lead yourself so everything else in your life starts to align. Let's begin. Hello, and welcome back. In the last two episodes, we've been talking about leadership presence and specifically the internal mechanics that either stabilize or quietly erode our presence as leaders. So today I want to talk about something that almost every leader experiences, but very few articulate clearly. And why do otherwise capable and intelligent leaders struggle when challenges feel personal? It's not about when the challenge is technical, not about when it's logistical, but when it lands emotionally. And so I want to make this the spine for today's episode, is that the challenge itself is not the problem. How leaders interpret and internalize the challenge determines whether they create the best possible solution. So if you understand this distinction, your leadership changes. Because how we identify the challenge is exactly how we will either make this into a problem or a solution. So let's unpack how we can actually utilize the challenge as a stepping stone into finding a solution rather than making it a problem that we internalize in some capacity, either in a detrimental capacity to ourselves internally, or make it a problem about another person, another situation, or experience. So the fact of the matter is that leaders are always going to face challenges. That is a certainty, is that as a leader, it is actually our job to navigate the challenges. So it is by virtue of those challenges that you become a better leader, that you find more of that capability. But it's going to require us to look at challenges in a different way. So let's have a look at what challenges might surface. So when you're working in a project or you're working in a position, you might experience the challenge from stakeholders, from board members, it might be from clients or from senior leadership. Someone questions a proposal, they push back on a decision, or they raise a concern, and on the surface is just input, but internally, as in within our nervous system, there is something that happens. There is a jolt. There could be a tightening in the chest, a spike in the defensiveness, or a flash of, hang on, did I miss something? Are they doubting my capability? Have I misjudged this? And these things can be happening consciously or unconsciously. And if we slow down enough, we can start to hear those questions or in reflection. So in those moments, something very subtle but critical happens. The challenge shifts from being external data to feeling like a personal evaluation. And that's the pattern. So instead of seeing the challenge as neutral information, the leader experiences it as a personal attack, a threat to authority, or evidence that they might not be as capable as they thought. And so from there, behavior changes. And this can be very subtle. Leaders may hesitate, they may overthink, and they may actually start to prove themselves. Or they can withdraw altogether and avoid the decision altogether. But there's something even worse that could happen. They could actually start to deny their own internal wisdom. And so, as we have talked about in previous episodes, this is where the focus narrows. This is where we become myopic. And instead of asking what creates the best solution here, the internal question becomes, and this is unconscious, this is an unconscious question, subconscious question, an automatic question, fight or flight. How do I protect myself? And that's the shift that undermines leadership presence. The underlying mechanism is simple, but it is very powerful because our emotional perception overrides neutral data. And if we can come to that point where we are observing the data neutrally, we have access to the information. But if we allow our nervous system to register it as a threat, and instead of investigating externally from an observer's perspective, we turn inward, and then it becomes an evaluation of what we are doing. Am I good enough? Am I missing something? Will this make me look incompetent? And the problem is no longer the initiative. The problem becomes the ego. And once that happens, the quality of the decision making drops. And what is the consequence or cost of this? Because when challenges are personalized, the cost isn't just the emotional cost, it is strategic. Because decisions become skewed by feeling instead of, it becomes about the feeling of discomfort rather than coming from the place of full information, access to the full information. And this is what might actually happen. You might soften a strong proposal prematurely. You might abandon an initiative that actually needed to be refined, not rejected. Or you might push something through reactively just to prove strength or just to prove point or just to get rid of that discomfort. So none of the responses are optimal because they're protective. And protection is not the same as leadership, because another cost is you may actually be missing more stronger and more creative solutions if you allowed that tension to exist, the discomfort to exist, and understood that the refinement of ideas is actually what derives the excellence. It is the refinement of the idea that allows it to be excellent. And this often requires the navigation of discomfort and the tension. Because if you're only focused on defending yourself, and again, this requires the consciousness to know when that moment exists, the fight or flight, that moment between the discomfort and the reaction. We're really focusing on that moment. When we can go into the defense of the idea, but this also doesn't allow that discovery of the blind spots, because it is those discomforts, the challenges that show up, that show where the blind spots are. So you don't ask the deeper question of what might they be seeing that I haven't considered yet. So you're not going into that curiosity. going into the defense. And so this is also where the authority gets undermined internally. Remember, it's the internal authority that gets lost first. And this isn't noticed necessarily, but it is felt. So even if you don't show it externally, the self-doubt is what chips away at the decisiveness, and you either move too cautiously with the risk aversion disguised as prudence, or you move too quickly and the decisiveness is disguised as strength. So neither of those is grounded. And let me give a concrete example here. So imagine a leader proposing a new initiative. It's well thought through. They believe in it. They've done the groundwork, and then the stakeholders push back. They question the feasibility. They raise concerns about the timing. They point out potential risks. If the leader internalizes that as they don't trust my judgment, the nervous system goes into that protection. And so maybe the leader doubles down defensively, and they may shut down the feedback. And maybe they scrap the initiative entirely to avoid further scrutiny. But imagine a different interpretation. The leader reframes the challenge as neutral data. It's not an attack, it's not an evaluation, it's information. So now the internal question becomes, what are they seeing? Because instead of defending, now the leader can investigate. It's like, okay, hang on. What are they seeing that I'm not seeing? What's in my blind spot? And then this is when the ideas get better. This is when you can, as a leader, harness the potential of that challenge, and you can get this idea to be more fully formed. Because now you can explore the concerns, you can test the assumptions, and you can pressure test that model. So those challenges actually become vital information to see, where are those blind spots? How can I make that idea indefensible? How can it hold up to scrutiny? How can I look at this from different angles to ensure that those challenges are actually, you take the information, you develop it, you can either see how that challenge is actually correct. Maybe there was a hole in the data that now you can find a solution for. Or maybe it's actually the challenge fully even more reinforces the idea that it is indefensible. But the challenge is actually producing a more robust solution when we take it on and see it as information. So what happens is you actually can discover the unseen risks. You can adjust timing and you can restructure part of a rollout. The final outcome is always going to be stronger than the original proposal. And it holds up against challenge, because as the leader, you can be grounded in that idea. It can hold up against the challenge because you have taken on those challenges. They're no longer in the blind spots. They're actually vital pieces of information that have been taken on board and refined. So what changes in all of this is not that it was challenging, it's the interpretation of what that challenge was. So personalizing challenges actually limits access to the critical information. Neutral framing surfaces the blind spots, and engaging the pressure thoughtfully actually strengthens your solution quality. So this is what mature leadership looks like. It's not about avoiding the challenge, it's about metabolizing it. So what's the new move? First, we get to set a new standard. When the challenge arises, we assume it as information before we assume it as being personal. And second, we observe your internal reaction without the judgment. So you notice what is happening without the judgment, because the judgment is a whole other episode. You notice what is happening within your body. Notice the jolt, notice the tightening, but we don't have to be attached to the meaning of that. It's noticing the moment and noticing it, that it's in that moment that, given the passage of space and time, will reveal the information. So we don't have to build a narrative around what is happening. We don't have to give it meaning. It's about the reorientation of that moment, seeing the moment, the challenge, seeing the challenge, and noticing that that is the moment that gives us the clarity, has the potential to give us the clarity. So it really moves from that this is threatening me to what information does this actually offer. So that is the single question. So the single question reopens the access to the strategic thinking. It stabilizes the nervous system, and it shifts you from that ego protection to the problem solving. And then the integration happens. You use the external input strategically, keeping your ego secondary to the outcome, because the decisions that are tested under the pressure produce the better solutions. And it's not weakness. This is the leadership depth. So remember, the challenge itself is not the problem. It's how you interpret and internalize it that determines whether you create the best possible solution. And that's the insight to carry with you today.
Before you go, take a moment with this. Is there any area of your life where you're being asked to trust yourself more, even if it feels uncomfortable? That's often where self-leadership is actually built. I'm really glad you're here, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Journey to Iconic podcast.